And at 2:05 in the morning on October 3rd, the C-130 transport flew over that hospital and began strafing it, even though the military had the coordinates, even though there's a $5 million system that's supposed to be coordinating drone surveillance. And
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City. On the web at thestruggle.org. Our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. Later in the program, we'll have the stirring speech by Kathy Kelly as she accepted the Gandhi Peace Award. But first, we start with some disturbing video of an interrogation of a Palestinian child. It was leaked by a brave Israeli. The boy is named Ahmad Mansara. He's 13 years old. He's being harshly interrogated about a knife attack in which 2 Israelis were seriously injured.
هذا كذب وراح افرجيك على فين. اسمع يعني اذا راح انا افرجيك فيلم كيف انت بتكذب، كيف انت رجعت وراه ولحقته. كيف يعني راح افرجيك كيف انت رجعت وراه. يعني انا قلت لك اذا بدك تصدقني صدقني. كيف يا مالك؟ طيب اذا ما بدك تصدقني وانا كذاب انت كذاب. طب خلاص انا كذاب. في فيلم بعد ما طعنته انت او من عمك او من خالك، بعد ما طعنته ردت من وراه، هو هرب وانت من وراه مع سكاكين هيك، كل واحد مع سكينه هيك وراه. ليش؟ خدوك على الرمله. الكاميرا صدقت وانا مش متذكر. يلا هلا قول لي كيف طعنته. والله بيفرجيني كيف طعنته. انت عم تحكي. ما بعرفش كيف. انت لازم تحكي. يلا. والله ما بتذكر. احكي لي كم مره طعنته. مش متذكر. كيف دفعته؟ مش متذكر اشي. مش متذكر اني دفعته. مش متذكر اشي. ولا اشي متذكر. مشان الله صدقني. لا ما بصدق. مش متذكر. انا ماكل ضربه. والله ناسي. مش قادر. راسي مش قادر. مش فاهم. مش عارف شو اللي حوالي. مش سيطرت اليوم الساعة 4. مش راس بعرف. كل شي بتحكوه صح. بس خلاص كل شي بتحكوه صح. والله ماني متذكر اشي. مش متذكر اشي. كل شي بتحكوه صح. انا مش متذكر اشي. كل شي بتحكوه صح. انا حسب ما شفت على الكاميرا.
In a civilized country, the boy would have been accompanied by a parent. He would have been told he didn't have to answer questions. His religion wouldn't have been mocked. But not in Israel. The videos have apparently been seen over 480,000 times on Facebook. And Israeli government officials still will no doubt be astonished that people are unhappy with them. A couple of weeks ago, we showed these photos of a Boston subway station where the Palestine Advocacy Project was able to get this billboard shown after a long court battle. A few days ago, there was a press conference, and it was attended by a bunch of haters of Palestinians who sent their venom against Richard Colbath-Hess, a spokesperson for the project. Yet he stood his ground against people who screamed abuse at him, including the word capo, which described Jews who cooperated with Nazis in concentration camps. And Colbath stood his ground against the hatred of these Jewish fascists.
I have personal friends, documentary who were shot without provocation. One was filming the Israeli army. He was shot through the window. He was not doing anything. Palestinians are killed and their human rights are abused every single day.
What do you think about the other side's assertion that the governor ought to look into this and fire whomever approved putting your ad out?
You know something? The T is a public place. It should have public debate. That's what we're having now. If you allow me to talk, we're having public debate. This is good for the American public.
You're having a debate. My people are being killed. You're having a debate. My people are being killed.
The ads that they said that they submitted that were rejected, should those be posted as well?
They should be posted, and there have been 3 or 4 pro-Israel ads that this Israel group has supported in the last year and a half. There are lots of pro-Israel groups on the T. The calling Arab savages I find very disturbing. And in fact, could you repeat that?
They're calling the death of 2,000 Palestinian children out of context the fact that Hamas holds them shields is disturbing.
There's no association between an occupation and what ISIS does. We condemn rocket attacks,
between ISIS and Hamas?
All forms of human rights abuses, including what's done by the Palestinians. And we support human rights for the Palestinians, keep children to school, that their association is that all Palestinian children are born to be terrorists, and that's just not true.
No, we did not say that. You are saying that. No one said that. You are saying that.
When they take the money. Why? This is a very obvious question.
I appreciate all the media's attention on this. I think that the solution to free speech is more free speech. If you don't like what's on the T, look away or put up your own ad. In fact, this ad was approved through the MBTA's process. The MBTA said this is not derogatory to a person or an individual. And I want to counter one thing very specifically. This ad is not against Jewish people. Many of my people are a Jew. My father was a Holocaust survivor. I know what it's like to have your human rights taken away. I've dedicated my life to standing up for people whose human rights are abused, including Israelis.
People who are killed in Syria, people who are killed in Africa.
What about the 300,000 in Syria?
In October, Kathy Kelly is a winner of the Gandhi Peace Award, presented by Promoting Enduring Peace.
I consider myself very, very honored to introduce Kathy Kelly this evening. Kathy has shown incredible courage traveling to a number of troubled places to try to prevent or halt war. In 1991, she and a few others sat on the border between Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, trying to prevent the Gulf War. During the 90s, she went to Iraq 26 times and witnessed the starvation caused by the sanctions imposed by our country at that time. Eventually, showing heroic defiance, she openly broke those sanctions that are estimated to have caused the deaths of over 500,000 children. Her group, Voices in the Wilderness, was fined hundreds of thousands of dollars, which it refuses to pay. She was in Baghdad when American troops entered during the so-called shock and awe invasion. Having myself recently visited the Jenin refugee camp in the West Bank of Palestine, a place that suffers greatly from the U.S.-Israeli occupation, I was very, very grateful to learn that in 2002, Kathy went to Jenin even while Israeli troops were there, shooting and destroying the area. Also, Kathy has been to the Gaza Strip several times, and most notably during Israel's Operation Cast Lead in 2009, a massacre that repeated itself in yet another assault on Gaza that resulted in the death of over 500 children a year ago last summer. Kathy was also a passenger on board the boat Audacity to Hope, part of the Gaza flotilla. She also took part in the campaign Welcome to Palestine, where activists attempted to reach the West Bank by flying to Tel Aviv and openly declaring they were going to the West Bank. Kathy and all the others were deported. Along with last year's Gandhi Peace Award winner Medea Benjamin, Kathy is an anti-military drone activist. In April of 2009, she and 14 others entered Creech Air Force Base to distribute leaflets protesting drone attacks in Pakistan, piloted remotely from that base. They were arrested and charged with criminal trespass. In June of 2000.
Well, good evening, and what an expansive evening this has been. I'm very, very grateful to be here with all of you tonight, to have the honor of being with Tom Goldtooth, to have heard so many reflections, both about promoting enduring peace, but also about relationships that have helped to bring all of us together tonight. So I'm grateful for your hospitality, and I deeply admire the creativity of continuing this work. I wish I could get in touch somehow with the military JAG lawyer who addressed the judge when I last was in front of a court. The judge went right to sentencing, and this very earnest military prosecutor said, "Your Honor, Miss Kelly is in great need of rehabilitation." And the court kind of laughed a bit, and I thought, well, actually, that young man was right. And as I think about Mohandas Gandhi and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, I know we all need in some ways to rehab our lives, especially in light of the crises that we face. And truly it is a fascinating time to be on this planet, but it's kind of an all hands on deck time too, isn't it? And so I have learned a great deal from my young friends. I taught high school myself for quite some time, and I never thought a group of 14 and 15-year-olds would become my main mentors when I hit my 60s, but these kids have been quite important for me. But I'd like to also tonight, thinking about the Blue Feather Group and their wonderful song and their sense of the future, invoke my own recent memory of 3 women. They were Native American indigenous people who sang a song their grandmothers had taught them about healing the waters after what we've done to those waters. And one woman who introduced the song emphasized that we're lucky, we have access to water, but that's not true for so many people all around the world, and very, very frightening realities will be faced by Tom when he goes to Paris to talk with people about climate. And so I think that sense of access brings forth a very difficult question. When I was a high school teacher, it was the most difficult question I could pose to students. Why ever in the world should people who already have so much, and that's often us, be entitled to get more? And then the corollary to that the way we secure that privilege in the United States, and I hesitate to say we because I know I'm looking at people who've struggled all their lives to change this system, but we live in a country that believes that we can secure the privilege and the security we have for ourselves by building up enormous arsenals, by predicating our foreign policy on threat and force and brutality, and by shipping our weapons off to other countries that sometimes do the bidding of our country, and promoting the idea to other countries that if you do not subordinate yourselves to be subservient to our national interest, then we will eliminate you. And if you don't believe us, witness Iraq. There's some stories that come to me, and quite honestly, it takes me some time before I can process them and tell them to others. And it's that kind of a story that I'd like to share with you this evening. I was home alone at the Border Free Center in Kabul. And the young people that I know, beloved young people, were out going up the mountainside like little social workers, trying to suss out who would be the 20 Tajik women and the 20 Hazara women and the 20 Pashto women who would make the heavy blankets and earn a living wage by doing so. And then those blankets would be distributed free of charge to some of the very most wretched families living in dire poverty when the harsh cold winter weather is coming. And so I heard a banging at the front gate, and I thought, oh, it must be the young women who've come back. And I opened the gate, and 2 women slipped inside the gate immediately. And one was perhaps a grandmother, the other a good deal younger. And they had walked for 3.5 hours from a mountainside because they wanted to be on the list. They wanted to earn that living wage and make the blankets, and could I, as the Westerner, not fix that? And so as I was trying to explain to them in my humbling Dari language that no, I wasn't able to make that list, the women began to realize that perhaps their trip might have been in vain, but certainly they weren't going to give up. And the grandmother showed me a festering wound on her ankle, and she really should have been given immediate medical attention. And the younger woman began to cry and said that they really don't have anything to feed their children, just stale bread. And then both of the women did something I could readily understand. They sat down. Now, I've done that many, many times in actions of civil disobedience. I thought, oh, I get this. And then the grandmother took my hand and she stroked it as though she, I think, were trying to let me know she understood how useless I was. But then she began to pound her breasts and she began to cry. And then Sonia came back, the young woman who'd been out finalizing the list of who would actually earn this livable wage. And she would have to tell the 2 women, no, the list is made. And, you know, sometimes I'll wake up in the morning and there'll be a woman sitting cross-legged across from me, hoping that maybe I can pay attention to or care about her situation. And my friend Hakim, a medical doctor from Singapore, who is the person who is the main mentor for these young Afghan teenagers, trying so hard to overcome the income inequities and to deal with possibilities of living interethnically, he and I both call these women the women who won't go away. And we say that with deepest respect, the women who won't go away. They shouldn't. They're doing the most enterprising thing they possibly can. But quite honestly, the tenacity that they show is perhaps most matched by another group, and I call them the generals who won't go away. The generals who stay in Afghanistan, who bring us back into Iraq, who will take us into Syria, who would have us believe that somehow their military might and force is protecting and improving the lives of other people. Sometimes the stories come out late at night. 2 young men I'm very close to, wanting me to understand more deeply what their family has endured, said that there was one night in the rural province of Bamyan when they were so cold and they only had thin blankets, and one brother had fallen asleep and another brother awakened, and he was miserable, shivering, and so he snatched the blanket off of his sleeping brother, and that brother woke up. Well, he realized he could die of hypothermia if he didn't get his blanket back, and so there ensued a struggle over one blanket. And the other brother remembers that they thought perhaps the brothers would suffocate each other. They were fighting so hard over that one blanket. And so it goes. People facing enormous need in one of the poorest countries on earth, and we now face our 15th year of being at war with them. The Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction, John Sufco, is a very honest man, and he consistently files reports, and they go 4 times a year to the United States Congress. And in one of his most recent letters, he points out that USAID, and I'm just going to footnote this by saying that now the United States in non-military aid has spent more money than was spent in the Marshall Plan in Afghanistan, $104 billion. That's in non-military aid. Also spending $2 billion per week on the war, $2.1 million per soldier per year for the year 2014 statistics. But anyway, USAID gets buckets, boatloads of funding. And so John Sopko was asking, well, how can this be that of 614 hospital and healthcare facilities that you list as being ones that you need millions of dollars in the last 6 months to fund, when we took Google Maps and did spatial imaging to try and see what's there for the coordinates you listed for these hospitals, 6 of them are in Tajikistan, 6 are in Pakistan, and 1 is in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. And your list says all of these hospitals are in Afghanistan. And 189 of the coordinates you listed, when we examine those coordinates with spatial imaging, show no building whatsoever. And for half of those, there's no building within 400 yards. And so John Sopko, very bluntly, is wondering, do these places exist? And so we have ghost hospitals, ghost clinics. NPR recently reported about ghost schools, ghost students, ghost teachers. So there's a very real hospital in Kunduz that was serving people in great need because the fighting was so intense in that northern province of Afghanistan. They had served 359 people in 1 week, 54 of them children. And at 2:05 in the morning on October 3rd, the C-130 transport flew over that hospital and began strafing it, even though the military had the coordinates, even though there's a $5 million system that's supposed to be coordinating drone surveillance and intelligence on the ground. And so immediately the hospital personnel started to call the authorities and say, you just bombed our intensive care unit, our hospital is in flames, it's becoming rubble. Every 15 minutes for the next hour and a half, the strafing continued. 30 people killed, 12 of them hospital staff, including doctors and nurses, 3 of them children. And a week later, the United States Special Operations Forces drove a tank into the shell of the hospital, destroying more evidence of what had happened. The choice between the works of mercy and the works of war. The Doctors Without Borders clearly evidenced their choice. I have a good friend, Jim Loney, and he and Christian peacemaker teams in Iraq perhaps stayed longer than was wise. Every other NGO had left, really. But they knew that they were able to figure out who was in what prison and help loved ones meet with their loved ones that were in prison. They had a big database. Anyway, 4 of them were kidnapped. They were held for 118 days in Iraq. And my friend Jim Loney's book called Captivity is one of the most important memoirs that I've ever read. And it turns out that at one point, even though they were shackled every night and then shackled to the radiators, they discovered the key to their own shackles. So they didn't tell their captors. But before they'd fall asleep at night, and right after the captor had left, who was the last to say goodbye to them, they'd unshackle themselves and at least be able to move around on their mattresses. And then they'd shackle themselves up again the next morning. And it was of great disturbance to them that they had the key to their own freedom, and yet they weren't sure if they jumped out a window, what would happen. They had no idea where they were. And so that key was a burden in some ways as well. And so, my friends, I believe we have the key. We can unshackle ourselves from the income inequities, from the addiction to wars, from the cooperation and complicity with that which could destroy the planet that we would hand on to next generations. We have the key. It's going to take enormous, enormous commitment and struggle and witness. But I believe that there are so many people all around the world who are in solidarity with your deepest altruism, with your finest desires. And so I'd like to end with something I learned most recently while I was in prison. when I was a kid, the sisters, the nuns, used to ask me to lip sing the Gregorian chant because my voice was so awful. I would just throw everybody off and break windows with this voice. But somehow I learned to sing on tune. Well, I was wandering around the basement of the prison, just trying to get my sea legs, and I walked into what I thought was an old storage room, but it was the chapel. And the women with the gospel choir were practicing, and with such graciousness and hospitality, they said, sing your scales, and I'm a good Catholic, I do what I'm told sometimes, and so I started singing, and they said, soprano. And so I began singing regularly every Sunday with the gospel choir and practiced 3 times a week, and it was a highlight of my life, really, and they taught me a song that's meant a great deal to me. There's an army rising up. There's an army rising up to break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. I hear those chains falling. I hear those chains falling. I hear those chains falling. No. Break every chain that shackles us to cruelty, to injustice, to war. It's something we can do, but it will take enormous trust if you look at the person next to you and the capacity that we have together. Thank you very much for this award.
Before we go, a note about 2 campaigns. One to stop the IRS from taking away the tax-exempt status of a group that has brought, for years, supplies to Cuba. And a call to support U.S. labor unions under attack by the Israeli government. More at thestruggle.org. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.